The Syrian sun hung like a brass coin in the white sky, baking Forward Operating Base Warhawk into something that resembled hell's waiting room. Captain Sarah Mendoza crouched in the shade of the communications tower, her M40 A6 sniper rifle propped against sandbags worn smooth by months of wind and grit. At 28 years old, she carried herself with the economy of movement that came from 5 years of Marine Corps Scout sniper training. Compact at 5'4", she'd learned early that size meant nothing when you could drop a target at 800 yards. The heat shimmered off the tarmac where three Sikorsky UH-60 Blackhawks sat like sleeping predators, their rotors drooping in the afternoon stillness. 47 Marines moved through the base with the practiced efficiency of men who knew their time in this godforsaken corner of the Syrian border was measured in hours now, not days. Sarah wiped sweat from her eyes and glanced toward the K9 compound. 7 kennels, 7 dogs, each one a military working dog trained to detect explosives, to attack on command, to die protecting their handlers if necessary. She'd watched these animals work for 6 months, watched them clear routes, watch them save lives. Corporal Danny Chen emerged from the nearest kennel, his desert camis dark with sweat. At 24, Danny had the lean build of a distance runner and the weathered hands of a man who'd spent his entire adult life handling military working dogs. He carried a metal bowl of water toward the far kennel where Sergeant, the 7-year-old German shepherd who led the pack, waited in the shade. "Chen!" Sarah called out. Danny altered course, his boots crunching on the gravel. When he reached the tower, he set the bowl down and pulled off his cap. "Ma'am, they give you a head count for the birds?" Danny's jaw tightened. It was answer enough. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach, despite the 115-degree heat. "How many seats?" 47 personnel, gear priority alpha. "In the K9s? Danny looked away, toward the kennels. From this distance, they could hear the dogs panting in the heat, the occasional whine or bark. These weren't pets, they were warriors. Sergeant alone had 17 confirmed explosive finds. Atlas had taken down an armed insurgent who'd breached the perimeter in March. Chaos, the smallest of the pack at 58 pounds, had saved 4 Marines by detecting a pressure plate IED that would have turned a patrol into pink mist. "Colonel Briggs says their equipment," Danny said quietly, "budget constraints, can't justify the fuel weight for assets that can be replaced." Sarah stood slowly, her hand instinctively moving to the dog tags that hung beneath her shirt. Her father's tags, Colonel Victor Mendoza, killed in action, February 27, 1991, Al-Khafji, Saudi Arabia. She'd been 6 months old, never knew him. But she'd spent 28 years learning who he was through the stories her grandfather told. "Replaced," she repeated. "Ma'am, I already tried. I told Briggs that Sergeant alone is worth more than half the sensor equipment we're loading. The colonel said I was out of line, threatened me with Article 15. Sarah's mind raced. 3 Blackhawks, 47 Marines, full combat loads plus personal gear. The weight calculations were tight, she knew that. But equipment? These dogs had names, had personalities. Sergeant preferred beef treats over chicken. Atlas was scared of thunder. Bones had a habit of sleeping with his paws in the air. "When's wheels up?" she asked. 1700, 2 hours and change. Sarah checked her watch. 1447 hours. The afternoon stretched before her like a prison sentence. "Get them water," she said. "All of them. Double rations." Danny nodded and picked up the bowl. He took 3 steps, then stopped. "Captain, you thinking what I think you're thinking?" Sarah met his eyes. "I'm not thinking anything, Corporal. I'm following orders, just like you." But they both knew it was a lie. 30 minutes later, Sarah stood in the cramped plywood structure that served as FOB Warhawk's command post. Colonel Marcus Briggs sat behind a field desk covered in maps and satellite imagery, his hair perfectly combed despite the heat, his uniform crisp in a way that suggested he spent more time in air-conditioned tents than on patrol. At 48, Briggs had the soft hands of a man who'd climbed ranks through staff positions and political maneuvering rather than combat leadership. "Captain Mendoza," he said without looking up from his paperwork, "I assume you're here to confirm your manifest position." "Sir, I'm here about the K9s. Now Briggs looked up. His eyes were pale blue, the color of ice on a lake. "The working dogs have been designated as non-essential equipment. This discussion is closed." "Sir, with respect, those dogs have saved more Marines in 6 months than most of our tech equipment." "Captain," Briggs's voice had the flat quality of a man used to being obeyed, "I don't have time for sentimentality. We have 3 aircraft and limited fuel. Every pound matters. The dogs stay." Sarah felt heat rising in her chest that had nothing to do with the Syrian sun. "Sir, Sergeant alone has 17 confirmed IED detections. Atlas stopped a breach that would have—" "I'm aware of their service record." Briggs stood, placing both palms flat on the desk. "I'm also aware of the $60,000 cost to train a replacement, which is significantly less than the $2.3 million it costs every time we fly a Black Hawk into hostile territory overweight. This is a math problem, Captain, not a moral one." "My father—" "Your father is dead." Briggs's words hit like a slap. "He died 33 years ago making a decision that got his entire crew killed. I will not repeat his mistakes." The room went silent except for the hum of a portable air conditioning unit. Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to her dog tags again. She'd heard the story 100 times from her grandfather. Victor Mendoza hadn't died from a mistake. He died because he'd chosen to extract wounded Iraqi children under fire instead of abandoning them. The helicopter had taken an RPG on the way out. All souls lost. "That's not how it happened, sir." "That's exactly how it happened. Your father violated direct orders, overloaded his aircraft, and paid the price. I won't watch you throw away your career over the same kind of emotional thinking." Briggs sat back down. "You're dismissed, Captain. Be on bird 2 at 16:30. Sarah stood there for a long moment, her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. Then she saluted, executed a perfect about-face, and walked out into the sun. The satellite phone call went through on the 3rd attempt. Sarah sat in the shadow of a HESCO barrier, the phone pressed to her ear, listening to the hollow clicks and pops of the connection bouncing off orbital relays. Then, finally, a ring. 2 rings. 3. "This is Crawford." The voice was gravel and granite, worn smooth by 72 years of life, and rough with the particular damage that came from breathing burning oil smoke in Kuwait back in 1991. Master Sergeant James Bull Crawford, retired. Her grandfather, the only father she'd ever really known. "Grandpa," Sarah said, and hated how small her voice sounded. "I need to know what Dad would do." Silence on the line. Then, "Where are you, baby girl?" "Syria. FOB Warhawk. We're evacuating. Wheels up in 90 minutes. "And you're calling me because—" Sarah looked across the compound at the K9 kennels. From this distance, she could see Sergeant pacing in his enclosure, his German shepherd instincts telling him something was wrong. "They're leaving the dogs," she said. 7 K9s. Colonel says they're equipment, not enough weight allowance." The silence stretched longer this time. Sarah could picture her grandfather in his cabin on Lake Norman, North Carolina, probably sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand. "Your daddy," Bull finally said, "never did know when to follow a bad order." "Tell me about Kafji." "Sarah, I need to hear it, the real version, not the sanitized one they put in the after-action reports." Bull Crawford had never been a man who wasted words. When he spoke, it was because something needed saying. Now he said, "February 27th, 1991. Your daddy was flying medevac support during the Battle of Kafji. Iraqi mechanized division had pushed into Saudi Arabia. We were pushing them back. He got a call that a building had collapsed in the city. Civilians trapped. Command said negative on extract. Too hot. Too many hostiles in the area. Sarah closed her eyes, seeing it play out behind her eyelids. Victor went anyway, Bull continued. Loaded up 8 Iraqi kids, 2, 3 years old, most of them. Building had come down on a shelter. He got them out, got them in the bird. Was lifting off when an RPG caught the tail rotor. They went down hard. No survivors. Briggs says Dad made a mistake. Briggs is a political officer playing soldier. Bull's voice carried the weight of authority that came from 3 decades of military service. Your daddy made a choice. There's a difference. He knew the risks. He did it anyway because it was right. Sarah opened her eyes. Across the compound, Marines were loading gear into the Blackhawks. What would you do, she asked, if you were here? Baby girl, I'm 72 years old and 3 time zones away. What I do doesn't matter. Yes, it does. Another long pause. Then Bull said, how far to the nearest extraction point? Sarah had already studied the maps. 42 miles. There's an old coalition airfield at Al-Hasaka, abandoned since 2019. Could be serviceable. 42 miles through hostile territory with 7 dogs. Yes, sir. On foot? Yes, sir. What's the threat assessment? Sarah pulled out her tactical map. Intel says ISIS remnants in the area, maybe some Assad loyalists, but we've had reports of something else. Foreign fighters, Russian accents on the radio intercepts. Wagner Group? That's the working theory. Bull Crawford had fought in 3 wars. He'd seen enough to know that Russian mercenaries in Syria meant serious trouble. Sarah, he said carefully, you're talking about going absent without leave. You're talking about stealing military assets. You're talking about risking your life for 7 dogs. Yes, sir. You understand you could face court-martial. Yes, sir. You understand I can't officially help you. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. That word, officially. I understand, Grandpa. Good, now write this down. Bull's voice shifted, becoming clipped and precise. Coordinates, 35.4721 north, 39.8833 east. You listening? Sarah grabbed a pen and wrote on her forearm. Copy. That's a cache point I set up in 2003, Iraq War. We had supply drops all through this region. I left something there for emergencies. Should still be good if the locals haven't found it. What kind of something? The kind that'll get you 42 miles through bad country with 7 dogs. Water, ammunition, medical supplies, and my old M24 rifle from Desert Storm. I carried that weapon through Kafji. It's got your daddy's blood on it, Sarah, literally. He grabbed it when he pulled me out of a burning Humvee in '91. Some of his blood got on the stock. Sarah's throat tightened. Grandpa, there's a letter in the cache too, from me. Read it when you get there, not before. Bull's voice softened slightly. Baby girl, you're about to do something that'll either make you a hero or end your career. Maybe both. But you're doing it for the right reasons. That's what matters. Thank you, Sarah whispered. Don't thank me yet. You got a long night ahead. Now listen close. I'm going to tell you the route I used in '91. Terrain hasn't changed much. Avoid the main roads. There's a wadi system that runs northeast from your position. Dry this time of year. Gives you cover from aerial observation. Sarah wrote furiously, covering her forearm with coordinates in tactical notes. One more thing, Bull said. Sergeant, the German Shepherd. I trained that dog in 2018 at Lackland. He was my last K9 before I retired. Smart as hell, loyal as they come. He'll remember my commands if you need them. Use German. Heer for heel. Fass for attack. Bleib for stay. You trained, Sergeant? Trained his whole bloodline, baby girl. That dog's got 3 generations of Crawford training in him. He'll get you home. Trust him. Across the compound, a whistle blew. First call for loading. I have to go, Sarah said. I know. Sarah? Yes, sir. Your daddy would be proud. I'm proud. Now go save those dogs. The line went dead. The thing about a military base closing down is that chaos provides cover. No one paid attention to the lone captain walking toward the K9 compound with a bolt cutter hidden under her jacket. Danny met her halfway, his face pale despite his tan. "Ma'am, tell me you're not. I need you to trust me, Corporal." Danny looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his cargo pocket and pulled out a small handheld radio. "Take this. I'll monitor when I can." Sarah took the radio. "This is stupid? Yeah, but these dogs saved my ass more times than I can count. Someone needs to save theirs." Danny pulled a folded paper from his other pocket. "Medical records for all 7. Training certifications. Might help if you make it back." Sarah took the papers. "If they ask where I went, I saw you heading toward the perimeter. Said you were doing a final security check. That'll buy you maybe an hour." They stood there in the Syrian heat, 2 Marines about to commit an act that would follow them for the rest of their careers. Then Danny saluted. Sarah returned it. Then she walked toward the kennels. The 7 dogs knew something was happening. Sergeant stood at the front of his kennel, his German Shepherd ears erect, his brown eyes tracking Sarah's movement. The Belgian Malinois, Atlas, Chaos, Bones, Shadow, Tank, and Reaper paced their enclosures. Sarah used the bolt cutters on the padlock. The lock snapped with a metallic crack. She froze, listening. No one had noticed. She moved to Sergeant's kennel first. The old dog watched her approach, his tail starting a slow wag. Sarah opened the gate, and Sergeant stepped out with the dignity of a senior NCO. He was bigger than the Malinois, 75 pounds of muscle and loyalty. "Hey, boy," Sarah said softly. She held out her hand and Sergeant sniffed it, his tail wagging faster. "You remember my grandpa, Bull Crawford? He says you're the smartest dog he ever trained." Sergeant's ears twitched at Bull's name. Sarah moved through the kennels systematically, releasing each dog and attaching leads. The animals stayed close, alert but quiet. She did a quick inventory of what Danny had prepared. 7 tactical leads, a pack with dog bowls and 3 days of kibble, basic medical kit, 4 gallons of water in collapsible containers, her M40A6 rifle and ammunition, her sidearm, a Sig Sauer M18, a K-bar knife, her GPS unit. Sarah hoisted the pack onto her shoulders. 60 pounds, maybe 70. The dogs waited, watching her with patient intensity. "All right," she said quietly. "We're going for a walk, a long walk. You stay with me, you do exactly what I say, and we all get home. Understand?" 7 pairs of eyes stared back at her. Sarah led them toward the perimeter, moving through the lengthening shadows. She could hear the Black Hawks now, their turbines starting to whine. 30 minutes to wheels up. She found the spot Danny had told her about, a low section where the wire was loose. She went through first, then pulled the dogs through one by one. When they were all through, Sarah looked back at FOB Warhawk. The Black Hawk's rotors were spinning now. Sarah could see figures moving in the light, Marines climbing aboard. She turned away and started walking northeast. 7 dogs falling into formation. Sergeant took point. The others spread out in a protective diamond. Behind her, she heard the first Black Hawk lift off, then the second, then the third. Sarah didn't look back. The sun was a red wound on the horizon when Sarah's radio crackled to life. Danny's voice, tight with tension. "Tango 6, this is Venom 2. You copy?" Sarah knelt behind a rocky outcropping. She keyed the radio. "Copy Venom 2, all birds away. Briggs discovered you missing 20 minutes ago. He's calling it a WOL, with appropriation of military assets. Sarah, he's issued orders to have you detained on site." Sarah closed her eyes. There it was. No going back now. Understood. There's more. Radio intercept from battalion intelligence. Those foreign fighters? Confirmed Wagner Group. 15 personnel, maybe more. Heavy weapons. And Sarah, they were asking about the K9 compound. Specifically, a chill ran down Sarah's spine. Why would Russian mercenaries care about military working dogs? I don't know, but they're in your area. Maybe 3 clicks south of your last known. They're moving north, toward you. Sarah looked at the 7 dogs. These weren't just dogs to Wagner Group. They were intelligence assets. Venom 2, what's your ETA to home station? 18 hours. I'll put in calls to your grandfather. Negative, radio silence. He's already too close to this. This is on me. A pause. Then, yes, ma'am. Good hunting. Bring those dogs home. Will do. Tango 6 out. Sarah studied her map by fading light. 39 clicks to Al-Hasaka. Her grandfather's cache was 10 clicks northeast, maybe 4 hours of hard walking. If Wagner Group was south and moving north, she needed to move east. Sergeant whined softly. The old dog had moved closer, pressing against her leg. Sarah ran her hand through his fur. Your grandpa trained you, huh? She said quietly. Bull Crawford. He said you'd get me home. Sergeant's tail thumped once. Sarah made her decision. She'd trust Bull's route, trust the low ground in the darkness. She stood, slinging her pack back on. All right, boys, time to move. Sergeant, here. The German shepherd moved to her left side. The other dogs fell in automatically. Sarah pulled on her night vision monopiece, adjusting the PVS-14 until the desert appeared in shades of green. She started walking, following the terrain down into the wadi system Bull had described. The stars came out overhead, brilliant and hard in the desert sky. She walked toward them, navigating by constellations her grandfather had taught her. The same stars that had guided warriors for 10,000 years. Sarah Mendoza walked into the darkness, 7 dogs at her side, carrying her father's dog tags and her grandfather's legacy. She'd made her choice. The same choice Victor had made in Kafji. The same choice Bull had made in 100 firefights. The choice to do what was right, regardless of the cost. The night desert was a study in contrasts. Cold air settled into the wadi, 40 degrees colder than the afternoon's heat. Sarah's breath condensed in small clouds. Through her night vision, the world glowed green and alien. She'd been walking for 3 hours, 10 kilometers covered, maybe 11. The dogs maintained formation without being told. Sergeant led from her left side, his nose constantly working. Atlas and Bones ranged slightly ahead. Shadow, Tank, and Reaper held the flanks. Chaos stayed close to Sarah's right leg. Her legs burned. The pack's 70 pounds pulled at her shoulders, but the dogs seemed tireless. Sarah checked her GPS. 4 more kilometers to the cache. She allowed herself 30 seconds to stop, to let the dogs drink. They lapped water with surprising delicacy. Sergeant finished first, then sat at attention. She was repacking the water when Sergeant's head snapped toward the wadi's southern bank. His ears went forward, his body rigid. The other dogs froze instantly. Sarah killed her penlight and dropped to one knee, bringing her M40A6 up. She flipped up the PVS-14 and pressed her eye to the rifle's scope. Movement, 300 meters south, maybe more. Multiple thermal signatures, human-shaped, moving in tactical formation. Sarah counted 8. 9. Wagner Group. Sarah's heart hammered. She forced herself to breathe slowly. The wadi provided cover from direct observation, but thermal imaging would pick up her heat signature. She needed to move. Hand signal to the dogs. Stay low, stay quiet. They dropped to their bellies. Sarah crawled forward on her elbows, moving toward a rock formation 30 meters ahead. The dogs followed, silent as smoke. The rocks provided better cover, their thermal mass radiating stored heat that would confuse infrared. Sarah wedged herself into a crack and brought her rifle up. Through the scope, she could see the searchers more clearly. 9 men in tactical gear, carrying AK-12 rifles, Russian military issue. They moved with professional precision. The lead man stopped, raising a fist. The patrol halted. He pulled something from his vest, thermal optic. He began scanning. Sarah pressed herself harder against the rock, willing the dogs to stay still. Sergeant seemed to understand. His body was motionless. The thermal scans swept past their position once, twice. The rock formation's residual heat was masking their signatures. The lead man lowered his optic and made a hand signal. The patrol began moving again, but west now, parallel to the wadi. Sarah watched them disappear, counting a full 5 minutes before she allowed herself to move. Her hands were shaking. Combat stress, adrenaline dump. She'd been in firefights before, but this was different. Before she'd had a unit, now she was alone. She reoriented with the GPS and started moving again, faster now. The Wagner patrol had been too close, their search pattern too deliberate. 30 minutes later, she found her grandfather's cache point. The coordinates were exact. A cluster of rocks arranged in a specific pattern. 3 large boulders forming a triangle, a flat stone in the center. Bull's signature. Sarah began moving rocks. After 10 minutes, she uncovered a military-grade storage container, olive drab, sealed with waterproofing. Inside was exactly what Bull had promised. 4 more gallons of water, military MREs, medical supplies, ammunition, 308 Winchester 9mm, and 3 fragmentation grenades. And there, wrapped in oiled cloth, was the M24 rifle. Sarah lifted it carefully. The weapon was older than she was. A Remington 700 action in a Macmillan stock. The wood stock showed wear, dark patches where hands had gripped it. And there, on the right side, was a dark stain that might have been oil, but wasn't. Her father's blood. Sarah's throat tightened. She set the M24 aside and found the letter Bull had mentioned. Plain white envelope, her name written in her grandfather's block letters. The letter was handwritten, dated 3 months ago. Sarah, if you're reading this, you've made a choice that'll either end your career or define it. Probably both. I won't tell you it was the right choice. That's for you to decide when you're old. But I'll tell you this. Doing the right thing is rarely the safe thing. Your daddy grabbed this rifle off me in Kafji when I was hurt. He used it to cover our extraction while I was being loaded. That's his blood on the stock. When they brought me his body bag, they brought me this rifle too. I've carried it ever since. Now it's yours. The route I gave you is the same one I used in '91. Trust the low ground. Trust the darkness. Trust those dogs. A good K9 is worth 10 men. Sergeant especially. That dog's got more combat sense than most Marines I knew. There's something I never told you about Victor. The day he died, we'd had an argument. He wanted to go after those Iraqi kids. I told him it was suicide. Last thing I said to him was, "You're going to get yourself killed doing something stupid." I was right, but I was also wrong. What he did wasn't stupid. It was brave. Those 8 kids survived. They're grown now, living in Michigan last I heard. Got families, kids of their own. All because Victor decided orders didn't matter as much as doing what was right. I spent 20 years angry at him for dying, another 10 understanding why. Now I'm just proud. Whatever happens out there, know that you're carrying on something bigger than yourself. You're carrying on a legacy of warriors who understood that honor isn't about following orders. It's about knowing which orders to break. Make me proud, baby girl. Make your daddy proud. Come home safe. Love always, Grandpa. Sarah folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her breast pocket. She wiped her eyes. Dust, she told herself, and began transferring supplies to her pack. The dogs had spread out, establishing a perimeter. Sarah was loading the last water container when Atlas, positioned on the wadi's northern edge, went rigid. A low growl built in his chest. Sarah grabbed the M40A6 and moved to his position. Atlas was staring north. Sarah followed his gaze through her scope. There, 800 meters out, was a vehicle. A technical Toyota pickup with a mounted weapon. And standing beside it were 5 men setting up what looked like a drone launch system. Sarah's blood went cold. Russian Orlan 10 reconnaissance drone. If they got that airborne, its thermal camera would map every heat signature within 20 kilometers. She had to move. Now. Here, she commanded quietly. The dogs converged instantly. Sarah did rapid math. The cache was exposed. If that drone launched and did a sweep, they'd be spotted immediately. The wadi continued east for another kilometer. If she could reach the branch point before the drone was airborne, she could use the terrain to mask movement. It would be close. Sarah grabbed the M24 rifle, slinging it across her back alongside her M40A6. Two rifles now. She ditched non-essential gear, keeping only water, ammo, medical supplies, and one day's food. Weight dropped to 55 pounds. She started running. The dogs paced her easily. Sarah's boots pounded the wadi floor, her breath coming in controlled bursts. 500 meters. 600. She could hear the drone's engine now, a high-pitched whine. 700 meters. The wadi began its curve north. Sarah risked a glance back and saw the drone rising, its navigation lights blinking red and green. 800 meters. The wadi deepened, its walls rising to 20 feet. Sarah pushed harder. The dog stayed with her. The drone's engine pitch changed. It had reached altitude. Sarah dove into a narrow side channel, pressing herself against the bank. The dogs piled in around her. She pulled a thermal blanket from her pack and threw it over herself and the animals. The drone passed overhead. Sarah lay absolutely still, feeling 7 dogs breathing against her, their hearts hammering. 60 seconds. 90. 2 minutes. The drone made another pass, closer. Through a gap in the blanket, Sarah could see its navigation lights tracking across the stars. 3 minutes. 4. Then the drone's engine pitch changed. It was moving away, continuing west. Sarah waited another 5 minutes before allowing herself to breathe normally. They'd missed her. The combination of the wadi's depth, the thermal blanket, and luck had kept them hidden. Sarah carefully folded the blanket and repacked it. That had been too close. The radio crackled. Tango 6, Venom 2, emergency traffic. Sarah's stomach dropped at Danny's tone. She keyed the handset. Send it. Sarah, listen. After we landed, I made some calls. Called a buddy at Battalion Intelligence. They've been tracking Wagner Group for 3 weeks. That's not the bad news. Sarah waited. The bad news is there's a leak. Someone at Division has been feeding Wagner intel about our operations. They knew about the evacuation. They knew about the K9s. And Sarah, they specifically requested information about Bull Crawford, asked about his service history, his tactics, his cash points. The pieces fell into place. They know where I'm going. Worse, they know how you'll get there. Someone gave them Bull's entire route from Desert Storm. Every cash point, every tactical position. Static erupted across the channel. Jamming. Wagner had electronic warfare capabilities. The radio crackled once more, Danny's voice barely audible. 12 of them, heading to Al-Hasaka, cut you off at... Then silence. Sarah stared at the radio, then switched it off. She was completely isolated. No communication, no support, and an enemy force that knew her destination and route. Sergeant pressed against her leg, whining softly. Sarah ran her hand through his fur, thinking. Wagner Group wanted the dogs. 7 K9s trained in American tactics, worth their weight in intelligence value. But more than that, they wanted to send a message. Sarah couldn't let that happen. She studied the map again. The direct route to Al-Hasaka was out. Wagner would be waiting. But there was another option. A longer route through territory that hadn't been controlled by any organized force since 2017. Lawless country full of mines and desperate people. 42 miles would become 60. 2 days would become 3, maybe 4. And she only had water for 2 days. But it was the only place she had. Sarah made her decision. She'd go to ground during daylight, move only at night, use every skill Bull had taught her. She stood, shouldering her pack. All right, boys, change of plans. We're taking the long way home. The dogs formed up instantly. They trusted her completely. Sarah started walking east, away from the planned route, into territory that probably hadn't seen American forces in 7 years. Somewhere ahead, Wagner Group was moving into position. Somewhere behind, her unit was flying home to safety. And here, in the middle of the Syrian desert, a Marine captain with 7 military working dogs was attempting the impossible. She checked her compass, adjusted her heading, and kept walking. 3 hours before dawn, Sarah found an abandoned building, half-collapsed concrete that had once been a Syrian army checkpoint. She conducted a careful sweep, then established a defensive position inside. The dogs collapsed gratefully. Sarah calculated distance covered. 18 kilometers, maybe 19. Not enough. But pushing harder would exhaust them. She needed to be smart. She fed the dogs half rations, gave them water, checked their paws. Chaos had a small cut on one pad. Sarah cleaned and bandaged it while the young Malinois licked her hand. As the eastern sky began to gray, Sarah climbed to the building's second floor and established an observation post. She set up the M40A6 and began glassing the terrain. Nothing moved. The desert was empty, painted in pre-dawn colors. But Sarah knew better than to trust emptiness. Wagner was out there. She pulled out her grandfather's letter and read it again. Trust the low ground, trust the darkness, and trust those dogs. Bull had survived 3 wars by understanding that technology was only as good as the warrior using it. Wagner Group had drones and thermal imaging and modern weapons. But Sarah had something older: fieldcraft, patience, and 7 animals whose ancestors had been hunting alongside humans since before civilization began. The sun rose, turning the desert into a furnace. Sarah settled into her observation position, ate a cold MRE, and watched. The dogs slept in the shade. Sergeant positioned himself closest to Sarah. Around noon, Sarah spotted movement. A technical truck, 4 kilometers west, moving slowly. Wagner Group. She watched through her scope as the vehicle stopped and men dismounted. 4 men visible. They were setting up another drone launch. The drone launched and began its search pattern. Sarah pressed deeper into the building's shadow, pulling the thermal blanket over her position. The drone passed within 2 kilometers, but didn't deviate. 2 hours later, it returned to the technical. The men mounted up and drove north. Sarah waited until the vehicle was out of sight. She descended and checked the dogs. They were alert now, but the sun was still high. Walking in this heat would be suicide. She forced herself to wait, use the time to clean her weapons, to check equipment, to plan. She studied the map until she'd memorized every terrain feature: wadi systems, ridge lines, abandoned villages, places to hide, places to fight if it came to that. As the sun touched the western horizon, Sarah heard something that made her blood freeze. Helicopters. She scrambled to her observation post. There, 5 kilometers south, were 2 Russian-made Mi-8 transport helicopters flying low and fast, heading northeast toward Al-Hasaka. Wagner Group was reinforcing. More men, more equipment. They were committing serious resources, which meant the dogs were more valuable than she thought. She descended and began preparing to move. The dogs sensed her urgency, rising and shaking themselves. Sergeant came to her side, his brown eyes meeting hers. "Yeah, boy," Sarah said quietly. "We're in deep, but your grandpa didn't train you to quit, did he?" Sergeant's tail wagged once. Sarah smiled despite everything. "That's right. Crawford dogs don't quit, and neither do Crawford Marines." She checked her weapons one final time. M40A6 loaded, 3 spare magazines. M18 pistol loaded, 2 spare magazines. M24 slung across her back. 3 grenades clipped to her vest. K-bar knife on her belt. She was as ready as she'd ever be. As darkness fell and the stars emerged, Sarah led her small pack back into the desert. 60 miles to go. 3 days of walking through hostile territory. Limited water, limited food, and an enemy force that outnumbered her at least 2 to 1. But she had 7 war dogs, her grandfather's tactics, and her father's legacy. It would have to be enough. The second night was harder. Sarah's feet had developed blisters that broke and bled into her socks. The pack straps had rubbed her shoulders raw. Her lower back screamed with each kilometer. The dogs fared better, but even they showed signs of fatigue. Chaos limped slightly. Tank's breathing had grown labored. They'd covered another 22 kilometers, putting them roughly 40 clicks from Alhasaka. Close enough to taste safety, far enough that it might as well be on the moon. Sarah called a halt in a dried streambed where ancient water had carved a deep channel. The banks rose 15 feet on either side, providing concealment. She checked her watch. 034, 2 hours. 3 hours until dawn. She distributed the last of the dog food, watching the animals eat with mechanical efficiency. Combat had stripped away everything except pure function. It made Sarah's chest tight to see animals this young, already this hard. Sergeant finished eating and moved to Sarah's side, lowering himself with a soft grunt. The old dog's joints were stiff. Sarah ran her hands along his body, checking for injuries. This dog had given everything to her country. What had her country given him? In order to leave him behind to die. Sarah's jaw clenched. Not on her watch. She pulled out the tactical map and studied it by filtered red light. Alhasaka Airfield was marked in pencil, a long strip of cracked concrete. Abandoned since 2019. Intelligence said it was empty, but intelligence had been wrong before. And now, with Wagner bringing in helicopters, Sarah had to assume the airfield was compromised. The radio had been silent for 18 hours. Sarah was operating in a complete information void. She made her choice. They'd approach the airfield from the east, using a wadi system that would bring them within 2 kilometers. From there, she'd do reconnaissance. If Wagner had it locked down, she'd have to find another option. What other option? She had no idea. Sarah repacked her gear, consolidating supplies. Water was critical now. Only 2 liters left for her, another 2 for the dogs. She'd have to find more before tomorrow night, or they'd be in serious trouble. As she worked, Sergeant's head snapped up. His ears swiveled forward, his body going rigid. The other dogs reacted instantly, rising to their feet in silence. Sarah froze, her hand moving to her rifle. She listened, straining against the wind. There, engines. Vehicles, multiple, moving slowly. The sound bounced off the terrain, making it impossible to pinpoint direction. But it was close. She made rapid hand signals. The dogs dropped flat. Sarah crawled to the streambed's edge and raised her head slowly. Headlights. 400 meters north, maybe less. 2 vehicles, technicals, moving in tactical formation with lights dimmed. They were searching. Wagner Group had found her general area. Sarah slid back down and assessed her options. The streambed offered concealment, but was also a trap. Only 2 ways out, both exposed. If Wagner spotted her here, she'd be pinned. But moving now meant exposure. The vehicles would spot any movement. She chose the third option. She'd fight. Sarah positioned herself behind a large boulder that provided cover and a stable shooting platform. She ranged the distances with her scope. 400 meters to the vehicles. Long shot for most. Well within her capability. She chambered around in the M40A6, the metallic click seeming impossibly loud. The dogs watched her, understanding that violence was about to occur. The vehicles stopped. Men dismounted, 8 of them, spreading out in a tactical line. They were conducting a dismounted patrol. Professional tactics. Sarah controlled her breathing, settling into her scope. The lead man was carrying what looked like thermal imaging. If he scanned this streambed, he'd spot them immediately. She had maybe 2 minutes. She found the lead man in her scope, center mass. Adjusted for wind, 5 miles per hour from the west. Adjusted for range, let out half her breath, and held it. The M40A6 kicked against her shoulder. Its suppressed report a sharp crack. 400 meters away, The lead man dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Sarah was already working the bolt, finding her second target, a man turning toward the sound. She fired. He went down. The remaining 6 scattered, taking cover. Muzzle flashes erupted as they returned fire, but they were shooting blind. Sarah shifted position, moving 3 meters left. She found a target partially exposed behind a tire. Adjusted. Fired. The man jerked and fell. Now they knew where she was. Rounds began impacting around her position, 7.62 by 39 millimeter bullets striking rock and sending up sprays of stone chips. Sarah pressed herself flat as the fusillade intensified. She made a decision Bull would have approved of. "Sergeant, fast!" The German shepherd exploded into motion, launching himself over the streambed's edge. The 5 Belgian Malinois followed instantly, their attacks silent and devastating. Sarah heard screams, shouting in Russian, panicked gunfire. She rose to a knee and fired at a man silhouetted against his vehicle's headlights. He dropped. Chaos reached a mercenary first. The dog went for the arm holding the rifle, his jaws clamping down. The man screamed, dropping his weapon. Atlas and Bones hit him from both sides, bearing him down. Sarah put 2 rounds into the man's center mass. He stopped moving. The entire engagement lasted 40 seconds. Sarah stood slowly, her rifle ready, scanning for additional threats. 7 bodies on the ground. 2 were moving, the ones the dogs had taken down. Sarah approached carefully, her sidearm drawn. The first man was already dead, his throat torn open. The second was dying, his rifle arm destroyed, his chest punctured. He looked at Sarah with eyes that held pain and resignation. "Medic," he whispered in Russian accented English. Sarah kept her pistol trained on him. "Where's your main force? How many?" The man coughed, blood on his lips. 12, at airfield. Volkov, he knows you're coming." His eyes focused on the dogs. "Wagner, pays good, but not worth dying for dogs." "These aren't just dogs," Sarah said quietly. "They're Marines." The man's eyes closed. He stopped breathing 10 seconds later. Sarah stood there for a moment, looking at the carnage. 7 men dead. She'd killed 3. The dogs had taken down 4. It should have bothered her more. But these men had hunted her, had wanted to kill her and steal the dogs she'd sworn to protect. Sometimes the choice between right and wrong was written in blood. She quickly searched the bodies, finding ammunition, water, and, unexpectedly, a satellite phone. Sarah powered it on. 2 bars. Not great, but functional. She tried Danny's number first. No answer. Then she tried the one number she'd sworn not to call except in absolute emergency. Bull answered on the second ring. "Crawford. Grandpa, it's me." A long pause. Then, "Baby girl, thank Christ, where are you?" 20 clicks from Al-Hasaka. "Wagner has the airfield locked down. There was contact. 7 hostiles, all down." "You hurt?" "No, dogs are good. But Grandpa, they knew the route. They knew everything." Bull's voice went hard. "I know. Danny called me 6 hours ago from Ramstein. There's an investigation starting at division level. But Sarah, that's not your immediate problem. Your immediate problem is a Russian mercenary named Dmitry Volkov. He's the Wagner commander on site." Sarah felt ice water run down her spine at the recognition in Bull's voice. "You know him?" "I know his father. Kafji, February 91. Iraqi Republican Guard colonel named Yuri Volkov. He was leading a mechanized unit that had our battalion pinned down. I called in an airstrike that took out his position, killed him in 30 of his men. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. This is personal for him. More than you know. After the war, I found out Yuri had a son, Dmitri. Kid was 16 when his father died. Swore revenge against Americans, joined Russian special forces, eventually ended up in Wagner. I've been tracking him through intelligence channels for years, making sure our paths didn't cross. Until now, Sarah said bitterly. Until now. Sarah, listen carefully. Dmitry Volkov is not a random mercenary. He's former Spetsnaz, highly decorated, and he's made a career out of hunting Americans. He's at that airfield specifically because he found out you're my granddaughter. This is about you, about me, about settling a 33-year-old score. Sarah looked down at Sergeant, who sat patiently at her feet. The old dog's muzzle was dark with blood that wasn't his own. What do I do? You survive. The cavalry's coming, baby girl. Danny got to General Webb. You remember him? Your CO from Desert Storm. That's right, Marcus Webb, retired 4-star. He made some calls. There's a Marine Force recon unit being scrambled out of Jordan. ETA to your position is 18 hours. 18 hours. An eternity. I'm not sure I have 18 hours, Grandpa. Then you make them. Find a defensive position. Go to ground. Wait for extraction. What about Volkov? Bull was quiet for a moment then. If it comes to it, if he finds you before the Marines get there, you do what needs doing. But Sarah, understand something. Dmitri is not evil. His father was a soldier following orders, same as me. I killed him because it was war. Dmitri hates me because I took his father. That's not evil, baby girl. That's human. You want me to reason with him? I want you to understand him. Understanding your enemy is how you beat him. Dmitri wants revenge, but he's also a professional. He has an honor code. If you can reach that, if you can make him see you as a warrior instead of just a target, I might survive, Sarah finished. You'll survive either way. You're Victor's daughter and my granddaughter. Crawford blood doesn't quit, but surviving with honor, that's the trick. Your daddy managed it, so can you. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 3 generations pressing down. I'll try, Grandpa. I know you will. Sarah, I love you. Whatever happens, I'm proud of you. I love you too. She ended the call and stood there in the darkness, 7 dogs around her and 7 dead men at her feet. The night was silent except for the wind. 18 hours to survive. 40 miles between her and those Force Recon Marines. And somewhere ahead, a Russian mercenary with good reason to hate everyone named Crawford. Sarah checked her ammunition. 12 rounds left for the M40A6, 43 for the M18, 2 grenades. The M24 had a full magazine, 5 rounds of her father's legacy. It would have to be enough. She signaled the dogs and started walking, not toward Al-Hasaka anymore, but to the south, where terrain maps showed an old Syrian army outpost, abandoned, fortified, defensible, a place to make a stand if it came to that. The dogs followed without question, their faith in her absolute and heartbreaking. Sarah led them into the darkness, carrying 2 rifles and the weight of her family's history. Dawn was 3 hours away. Then the real test would begin. The outpost was exactly where the map said it would be, a cluster of concrete bunkers arranged in a defensive semicircle on a low ridge. Syrian military construction from the 1980s, built to Soviet specifications, thus walls, small windows, good fields of fire. It had been abandoned for at least a decade, but the bones were solid. Sarah conducted a thorough sweep. After 30 minutes, she declared it safe. She chose the central bunker as her command post. It had the best visibility and 2 exits, critical for tactical withdrawal. Sarah positioned the dogs in the interior, giving them water and the last of their food. They drank gratefully but seemed confused by the absence of more kibble. I know, boys, Sarah said quietly. We're running low on everything. Just a few more hours. Then the Marines get here, and we all go home. Sergeant pressed his head against her leg, his weight solid and reassuring. The old dog knew something was wrong, but he trusted her to fix it. Sarah climbed to the bunker's roof and established a proper fighting position. She used rubble to create a sandbag-style berm, positioned her rifles for quick access, and ranged key terrain features with her scope. The outpost sat on a ridge that dominated the surrounding desert for nearly 2 kilometers. Anyone approaching would be visible long before they reached effective engagement range. Unless they approached at night with thermal imaging, then all bets were off. Sarah estimated she had maybe 2 hours before Wagner discovered the bodies of their patrol. Once that happened, Volkov would know exactly where she was. The satellite phone she'd taken was probably trackable. He'd come with everything he had. She pulled out the satellite phone and powered it on, long enough to send one text to a number Danny had given her. Just coordinates in a simple phrase. Last stand, send Marines. Then she pulled the phone's battery and threw both pieces into the desert. No more tracking. The sun rose slowly, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold. It was beautiful, in the way that dangerous things often were. Sarah ate her last MRE and watched the empty landscape. At 0847 hours, she heard helicopters. 2 Mi-8s, flying low and fast from the north. They passed within 3 kilometers of the outpost, but didn't deviate. They were heading south, probably to the site of last night's ambush. 30 minutes later, they returned. This time they were circling, searching. They'd found the bodies. Sarah pressed herself flat against the bunker's roof, becoming one with the concrete. The helicopters made 3 passes, their search pattern expanding. Then they turned north and flew away. But they'd be back, and next time they'd bring Volkov. Sarah descended and checked her defensive preparations. She'd placed the 3 grenades at strategic points. The pins were loosened, ready for quick deployment. Her rifles were loaded and positioned. The dogs were rested, fed, and watered as much as possible. She was as ready as she'd ever be. At 1320 hours, she saw the dust cloud. Vehicles approaching from the north. 4 technicals moving in tactical formation. They stopped at the ridgeline 2 kilometers out, just at the edge of Sarah's effective range. She watched through her scope as men dismounted, 12 of them. They were setting up a command post, establishing a perimeter. Professional, disciplined. Then a 13th man emerged. He was tall, probably 6'2", with broad shoulders and narrow waist. His face was partially obscured by a tactical scarf, but Sarah could see a long scar running from his left temple to his jawline. He moved with the confident economy of a man who'd seen combat and survived. Dmitry Volkov. Sarah watched him through her scope as he surveyed the outpost through binoculars. He was taking his time, studying the terrain, calculating angles. He was in no hurry. He had time and numbers on his side. All he had to do was wait for nightfall, then assault with overwhelming force. Unless Sarah did something unexpected. She picked up a small, portable radio she'd taken from one of the dead mercenaries. She tuned to a common frequency used by Russian military forces. Then she keyed the transmit button. "Volkov," she said in clear English, "I know you can hear me. This is Captain Sarah Mendoza, United States Marine Corps. I'm the one who killed 7 of your men last night. I'm also the granddaughter of Master Sergeant James Crawford." Silence. Then her radio crackled to life. "Captain Mendoza." The voice was deep, cultured, with a British accent underneath Russian phonetics. "I must congratulate you. 7 men dead with 7 dogs. Impressive. Your grandfather trained you well." "He did, just like he trained these dogs. They're not equipment, Volkov. They're warriors. They bled for my country. I won't let you take them." "Take them?" Volkov actually laughed. "Captain, I have no interest in your dogs. I want you. You and the man who killed my father 33 years ago. Your grandfather murdered him in Kafji, called in an airstrike on his position. 31 men burned alive." Sarah's jaw clenched. That was war. Your father was leading a mechanized assault on American positions. My grandfather did his job. His job, Volkov repeated, his voice hardening. His job was murder. My father was a colonel defending Iraqi territory from American invasion. Your grandfather killed him from the safety of a radio, never looking him in the eye. That is not a warrior's death. That is cowardice. My grandfather is not a coward. Then prove it. Come out. Face me. You and I, one-on-one. The dogs go free regardless of outcome. You have my word as a soldier. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Your word? You're a mercenary. You fight for money, not honor. I fight for both, Captain. I may take money, but I keep my word. Proof? I could storm your position right now. I have 12 men to your 1. I have RPGs that would reduce your bunker to rubble in minutes. But I'm offering you a chance to do this with honor. Warrior to warrior. Or are Crawford women as cowardly as Crawford men? The insult was calculated, designed to provoke. Sarah forced herself to breathe slowly. If I come out, what happens to the dogs? They live. I will personally ensure they are returned to American forces. Again, you have my word. And if you win, what happens to me? You die, but you die as a warrior with honor. Better than being burned alive in that bunker, yes? Sarah looked down at Sergeant, who was staring up at her with those knowing brown eyes. The old dog understood. Can I have 10 minutes to think about it? Sarah asked. You have 5. After that, I assume your answer is no, and I assault your position. The dogs die with you. The radio went silent. Sarah sat down heavily. 5 minutes to decide if she was going to walk out and face a Spetsnaz-trained killer in single combat, or stay here and fight 12-to-1 odds. Either way, she was probably going to die, but the dogs might live. Sarah pulled out her father's dog tags and held them. Victor Mendoza had faced this same choice in Kafji: stay safe or land in a hot zone to save Iraqi children. He'd chosen honor over safety, and it had killed him. But those 8 children had lived, were adults now, with families. Victor's death had given them life. Sometimes the math was that simple. Sarah stood and began preparing. She stripped off her tactical vest, keeping only her sidearm and K-bar knife. She'd go out light, fast. She gave each dog a final pat, whispering to them in German. Bleib, stay, wait for the Marines, they're coming. Sergeant whined softly, sensing what was about to happen. The old dog pressed against her leg, refusing to move. I have to, boy, Sarah said, her throat tight. This is the only way you all get home. She kissed the top of Sergeant's head, then forced herself to walk away. At the bunker's entrance, she paused and keyed the radio. Volkov, I'm coming out. I want your word, on your father's grave, that the dogs go home safe. On my father's grave, Captain. The dogs will return to American forces unharmed. Sarah took a deep breath, checked her pistol one last time, and stepped out of the bunker into the afternoon sun. The walk across 200 meters of open desert was the longest of Sarah's life. She kept her hands visible, her pistol holstered, walking at a steady pace. Volkov's men had formed a perimeter, weapons ready, but not raised. They were giving their commander space. Volkov stood alone, 30 meters from his vehicles. He'd removed his tactical vest and most of his weapons, keeping only a pistol and knife. Mirror image of Sarah's loadout. He was giving her a fair fight. As Sarah approached, she got her first clear look at him. 42, maybe 43. The scar on his face was old, probably from Chechnya. His eyes were pale blue, intelligent and hard. This was a man who'd seen the worst humanity could offer and had become part of it. They stopped 10 feet apart. Captain Mendoza, Volkov said formally, you are brave to face me. Your grandfather should be proud. He is, Sarah said, just like your father would be proud of you. 33 years tracking revenge. That takes dedication. It takes justice. No, it takes grief. Your father was a soldier. He died a soldier's death. My grandfather was a soldier. He made a soldier's decision. The only person making this personal is you." Volkov's jaw tightened. "Easy for you to say. You never knew your father. I watched mine die on television. CNN broadcast the airstrike live. I was 16 years old, watching American bombs destroy the only man I ever admired. So yes, Captain, this is very personal." Sarah had no response to that. She could see the pain in his eyes, old and deep and never properly healed. She understood suddenly what Bull had tried to tell her. Dmitry Volkov wasn't evil. He was just broken. And he'd spent 33 years trying to fix himself through revenge. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I'm sorry you lost your father. I'm sorry he died that way. But killing me won't bring him back. And it won't make you feel better. I know because I spent 28 years being angry at a father I never met. Angry that he died doing something heroic. Angry that he left me. Angry at everyone who got to keep their fathers while I didn't. But you know what I finally learned?" "What?" Volkov asked, his voice rough. "The anger was eating me alive. It wasn't until I let it go that I could finally understand him, could be proud of him, could carry on his legacy without the weight of that rage." Volkov stared at her for a long moment. Then he pulled his pistol. Sarah's hand moved to her own weapon, but she didn't draw, not yet. "Pretty speech, Captain, but my father is still dead, and your grandfather still killed him. Some debts can only be paid in blood." "Then let it be my blood, not the dog's. You gave your word." "I did, and I will keep it." Volkov raised his pistol, aiming at Sarah's center mass. "Any last words?" Sarah met his eyes. "Yeah, my grandfather says hi." Behind Volkov, on the ridgeline 2 kilometers away, a figure rose from the sand where he'd been laying for the past 4 hours. Master Sergeant James Crawford, 72 years old, worn down by 3 wars and 33 years of carrying guilt, squeezed the trigger of the M24 rifle his granddaughter had left behind in the bunker. The range was 2,100 meters, nearly impossible shot. Wind at 8 miles per hour from the west. Temperature 112 degrees. Mirage distorting the sight picture. But Bull Crawford had made harder shots, and this one mattered more than any in his life. The 7.62 millimeter NATO round took Dmitry Volkov in the upper right shoulder, spinning him like a top. His pistol discharged into the sand as he went down. Sarah moved instantly, drawing her sidearm and covering Volkov's men. But they weren't moving. They were staring in shock at their fallen commander. Then the sky filled with sound. 4 V-22 Ospreys came in low and fast from the south, their rotors thundering. The tilt-rotor aircraft settled into hover positions around the outpost, and Marines began fast roping down. 20 men, full combat loads, forced recon by the look of them. The Wagner mercenaries recognized a bad situation. They began backing toward their vehicles, weapons lowered. This wasn't worth dying for. Sarah knelt beside Volkov, who was clutching his shoulder and staring up at the sky in disbelief. Blood seeped between his fingers, but the wound wasn't immediately fatal. Bull had aimed to wound, not kill. "Your grandfather?" Volkov gasped. "My grandfather," Sarah confirmed. "He says the debt's paid. You're alive. Think about that before you come after another Crawford." She looked up as the Marines established a perimeter. One of them approached, a lieutenant with a weathered face. "Captain Mendoza?" "Lieutenant Harris, 2nd Force Recon. General Webb sends his regards. You injured?" "Negative, but I've got 7 K9s in that bunker that need immediate evac, and this one needs medical attention." She indicated Volkov. "Copy that. We've got a trauma team aboard." Harris looked at the Wagner mercenaries. "What about them?" "Let them go. They're done here." Harris raised an eyebrow, but nodded. He made a hand signal, and his Marines allowed the Russians to withdraw. Within 5 minutes, Wagner Group was retreating north, leaving their wounded commander behind. Volkov watched them go. his face pale from blood loss and shock. "You let them leave?" "This isn't about killing Russians," Sarah said. "It's about getting my dogs home." A Marine corpsman arrived and began working on Volkov's shoulder, packing the wound and starting an IV. The Russian mercenary stared up at Sarah. "Your grandfather, he could have killed me. That range, that shot, he's still one of the best." "He is, but he's also smart enough to know that some cycles need to be broken. He killed your father in war. If he'd killed you today, your son would hunt his great-grandchildren, and so on, forever. So he shot you in the shoulder, debt paid, cycle broken. Now you get to choose what kind of man you'll be." Volkov's eyes closed. "I have no son. Then you get to choose what kind of man you'll die as. One defined by rage, or one defined by honor." Before Volkov could answer, Sarah heard barking. She turned to see 7 military working dogs streaming out of the bunker, tails wagging, moving at full sprint. The Marines had released them. Sergeant reached Sarah first, jumping up and putting his paws on her chest, his entire body wiggling with joy. The other dogs surrounded her, pressing close, their relief palpable. Sarah dropped to her knees, letting the dogs swarm her, their tongues and fur and warmth overwhelming. She was laughing and crying simultaneously, her hands running over each animal, checking for injuries, reassuring them. "Good boys," she kept saying. "Such good boys. We're going home." Lieutenant Harris watched with a small smile. "Ma'am, we've got transport standing by. Let's get you and your pack out of here." Sarah stood, wiping her eyes. "Copy that, but we've got one more pickup first." 30 minutes later, the Osprey circled the ridgeline where Bull Crawford sat waiting. The old Marine had made the shot of his life, then waited patiently for his ride home like he'd done 100 times before. Sarah watched from the Osprey's crew door as Marines fast roped down to secure the LZ. Then Bull was walking across the sand toward the aircraft, the M24 rifle slung over his shoulder, moving with the slow deliberation of a man who'd earned every one of his 72 years. He climbed aboard and the crew chief closed the door. The Osprey banked hard, gaining altitude, and Syria fell away beneath them. Bull and Sarah looked at each other across the troop compartment. Between them, 7 dogs lay panting but content. Around them, Marines sat silent, giving them space. Finally, Bull spoke. "That was a damn stupid thing you did, baby girl." "I learned from the best, Grandpa." "Your daddy?" "You." Bull Crawford, Master Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, retired, winner of the Silver Star and Purple Heart with 2 clusters, veteran of 3 wars and countless battles, smiled. "Come here." Sarah crossed the compartment and Bull pulled her into a crushing hug. She pressed her face against his shoulder and finally let herself cry. Not from fear or relief, but from the simple, overwhelming gratitude of being alive. "Proud of you," Bull said quietly, his voice rough. "So damn proud." They stayed like that as the Osprey flew them toward safety, toward home, toward the rest of their lives. 2 months later, the ceremony was held at Camp Lejeune. Small, private, no media, just Marines who understood what had really happened in that Syrian desert. General Marcus Webb, 78 years old but still straight as a rifle barrel, pinned the Navy and Marine Corps medal on Sarah's dress blues. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism in the face of overwhelming odds, displaying courage and tactical excellence while protecting military assets and refusing to abandon her post." It didn't mention that the military assets were 7 dogs. It didn't need to. Everyone there knew. Bull sat in the front row, wearing his own dress blues, despite the fact they didn't quite fit anymore. He'd lost weight since Syria, but his eyes were bright and clear. The guilt he'd carried for 33 years had been lifted. Dmitry Volkov was alive, recovering in a Russian military hospital. The cycle was broken. After the ceremony, Sarah stood outside with her grandfather. Danny was there too, having received his own commendation for his role in coordinating the rescue. The 7 dogs had been retired from active service, and adopted through Bull's veteran network. Sergeant and Chaos were with Bull now, living at his cabin on Lake Norman. "You know they're changing the policy," Danny said. "K9s are now classified as personnel, not equipment. Mandatory evacuation with their units." "About damn time," Bull growled. Sarah watched a training formation of recruits run past. Young men and women starting their journey, not knowing where it would lead, just like she'd been once. "You think Volkov will come after us again?" she asked Bull. "No, I've been monitoring intelligence chatter. He's retired from Wagner Group. Last report has him running a security consulting firm in Moscow. Legitimate work." Bull smiled slightly. "Heard he donates money to a charity that helps children of war casualties. Both sides, Russian and American." "He broke the cycle," Sarah said softly. "We all did, baby girl. Sometimes that's all you can do." General Webb approached, his uniform still immaculate. "Captain Mendoza, I wanted to give you something." He handed her a small box. Inside were dog tags, old ones worn smooth by time. "Colonel Victor Mendoza," Webb said quietly. "I served with your father. He was one of the finest officers I ever knew. He made the hard choices, the ones that cost him everything, just like you did." Sarah held the tags, feeling their weight. Her father's tags, the ones he'd worn when he died. She added them to the ones she already wore. Her grandfather's old tags, creating a chain that connected 3 generations. "Thank you, sir." Webb saluted. It wasn't the casual salute of everyday military life, but the slow, respectful salute reserved for warriors who'd proven themselves in the fire. Sarah returned it. As the sun set over Camp Lejeune, Sarah walked with Bull toward the parking lot. Sergeant and Chaos trotted beside them, the old German Shepherd and the young Malinois, both alive because people had chosen honor over orders. "What now?" Bull asked. "Back to your unit?" Sarah smiled. "Actually, I've been offered a position, training new K9 handlers, teaching them that these aren't just dogs, they're Marines. Your daddy would like that. And Sarah?" "Yes, Grandpa. When you have kids someday, when you're telling them stories about all this," Bull gestured back at the ceremony, at the base, at everything that had happened, "make sure they understand something. The medals don't matter. The rank doesn't matter. What matters is the choice you make when nobody's watching. When the right thing and the easy thing aren't the same thing, that's when you find out who you really are." Sarah took his hand, weathered and scarred and still strong. "I'll tell them, and I'll tell them about you, about Dad, about the warriors who knew which orders to break." They walked together through the lengthening shadows, 4 generations of military service between them, 7 dogs saved, and 1 cycle of vengeance broken. The evening sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, beautiful and fleeting, like everything worth fighting for. Behind them, carved in stone at the base entrance, were words that every Marine knew by heart. Semper Fidelis, always faithful. Sarah Mendoza had been faithful to her oath, to her dogs, to her family's legacy of choosing honor over orders, righteousness over rules, and love over law. And in the end, that faith had brought them all home. The stars came out, one by one, the same stars that had guided warriors for 10,000 years, the same stars that would guide warriors yet to come. And beneath them, a Marine and her grandfather and 7 dogs walked toward home, their war over, their duty done, their honor intact. Some stories end in victory, some end in defeat. The best ones end in redemption. This one ended in all 3.